Imagine a world where the very rhythms that once defined entire cultures have been nearly forgotten, replaced by the relentless tide of modern music. What happened to the sounds that once resonated in every home, every ceremony, every festival? In the quiet corners of history, there are echoes, faint yet profound, of music that once shaped the very heartbeat of nations. Love what you're watching. QR's on screen. Scan it and join the community. Don't miss what's coming next in the quiet corners of history. There are echoes, faint yet profound, of music that once shaped the very heartbeat of nations. These are the forgotten sounds of indigenous music genres that have been eclipsed by the roar of modernity, the crescendo of globalized pop, and the surge of digital beats. Yet beneath the surface of contemporary tunes, these ancient rhythms still stir, waiting for their moment to return. The Hall of Legacy, a symbolic repository of forgotten sounds, stands as a testament to the rich musical traditions that once were the lifeblood of entire cultures. The story of indigenous music is as old as humanity itself. Long before the world became a melting pot of genres, each region had its own unique soundscape. These sounds were born from the earth, from ancient traditions, and from people who, despite limited resources, had the most profound of instruments: their voices, drums, and handcrafted stringed instruments. The power of music was not only to entertain, but to carry the stories, struggles, triumphs, and sorrows of generations. These ancient sounds were the first form of communication, blending rhythm with poetry to tell the tales of birth, death, war, love, and the divine. For centuries, indigenous music was not just a form of entertainment, but a fundamental part of every ceremony, every social gathering, every ritual, and every rite of passage. In Africa, the rhythms of the djembe drum echoed through the villages of West Africa, calling to communities to gather for celebrations, work, and storytelling. The balafon, with its distinct melodic tones, painted images of harvests and festivals in the minds of the young. The kora, an intricate stringed instrument, held the wisdom of griots, oral historians, who passed down the cultural memory of entire peoples. Each note was a chapter of history, and each song was a bond, connecting one generation to the next. In South America, the sounds of the charango and pan flutes filled the mountain air, telling tales of Inca legends that stretched far beyond the Andes. Indigenous music played a central role in rituals, bringing people closer to their gods and ancestors. In Asia, the sitar and tabla resonated through the courtyards, where classical musicians spoke in the language of raga and tala, deeply connected to the rhythms of nature and life itself. These genres were born from the land, the culture, and the people, and they were woven into the fabric of everyday life. From the agricultural cycles of the African villages to the spiritual ceremonies of Native American tribes, indigenous music was the soul of their cultures. The golden age of indigenous music, the mid-20th century, saw indigenous music genres flourish. In Africa, the fusion of traditional rhythms with jazz and Western influence gave rise to genres like highlife, juju, and afrobeat. Legends like Fela Kuti, King Sunny Ade, and Miriam Makeba brought the sounds of Africa to the world stage, transcending borders and connecting people through the universal language of music. Fela's afrobeat, for example, was more than just music. It was a form of resistance, a political statement that challenged oppression and spoke truth to power. Fela Kuti's songs were battle cries, rallying the masses to take a stand against corruption and injustice, while artists like Angelique Kidjo, Youssou N'Dour, and Hugh Masekela helped carry the African sound to the global stage, earning international acclaim. In the Caribbean, genres like calypso and reggae took root in the 20th century. These musical forms spoke of revolution, of the struggle for freedom, and the pain of colonialism. The voices of Bob Marley, Trinidadian calypsonians, and Jamaican ska bands became anthems for the marginalised, embodying the spirit of resistance and hope. Reggae's global influence, especially after Marley's international fame, showed the world how indigenous sounds could transcend their origins and impact global culture. In Asia, the classical music traditions of India and China held sway, with the sitar, tabla, and the guzheng representing more than just musical instruments. They were sacred objects that connected performers to the divine. Indian classical music, with its intricate raga system and its deep spiritual roots, found its place in Western popular music, influencing artists like George Harrison of the Beatles, who famously incorporated the sitar into their music. The cultural exchange that took place in the 1960s and 1970s brought Indian and Chinese music to the attention of Western listeners, showcasing the depth and richness of indigenous sounds. In the Americas, indigenous music remained deeply connected to the land and rituals. Native American flute music, ceremonial drumming, and chanting were integral to the spiritual life of many indigenous tribes. Though these traditions faced the relentless pressures of colonization and modernization, they remained resilient. In the 20th century, efforts were made to preserve these sounds, and artists like the Navajo and Lakota musicians began to share their traditions with the world through recorded music. The decline, the modern beat, takes over, however, as the world entered the digital age. The traditional sounds of indigenous music began to fade. The rise of Western pop music, rock and electronic dance music led to the gradual decline of these ancient genres. The globalized music industry, driven by profit motives and mass consumption, favored catchy tunes with easily digestible melodies, often at the expense of deeper, culturally specific sounds. As television, radio, and later streaming platforms reshaped how the world consumed music, the ancient rhythms of the djembe, the sitar, and the charango found themselves in the background, overshadowed by the likes of pop idols, rap superstars, and EDM DJs. In Africa, genres like highlife, juju, and even traditional drumming began to lose their prominence, replaced by the explosion of Afrobeat, hip-hop, and the rise of artists who blended indigenous rhythms with Western genres. While Afrobeats is undeniably a reflection of Africa's contemporary sound, it has moved away from the traditional forms that once defined the continent's music. The same happened in the Caribbean, where reggae, once the anthem of the oppressed, was gradually overtaken by dancehall and reggaeton. These newer genres, while still influenced by indigenous sounds, were more commercially viable and globally marketable, leading to the eclipse of the traditional music forms. In Asia, classical music traditions, which once held immense cultural significance, began to lose ground to Western pop music and more accessible genres. K-pop's global rise, for instance, further pushed indigenous sounds into the shadows, with the emphasis on polished, catchy tunes and highly stylized performances. The sitar, once a symbol of India's cultural pride, was now a niche sound for aficionados, while Bollywood music became more influenced by Western pop and electronic beats. The cultural battle for preservation, the decline of indigenous music, is not merely a result of changing tastes. It is also a consequence of broader cultural shifts. The forces of globalization have made it more difficult for indigenous cultures to maintain their traditions, particularly when the global music industry is driven by profit and mainstream appeal. In many parts of the world, indigenous music is no longer taught in schools or passed down through generations in the way it once was. The younger generation is more likely to be influenced by Western pop culture than by the sounds of their ancestors. Yet, despite these challenges, there are growing efforts to preserve and revitalize indigenous music. In Africa, organizations are working to document and preserve traditional drumming techniques, while modern artists are starting to incorporate these sounds into their music. In the Caribbean, reggae festivals are held to celebrate the roots of the genre, and in South America, indigenous music is being reclaimed by new generations who are determined to keep their cultural heritage alive. In India, there has been a resurgence in interest in classical music, with young musicians returning to their roots and exploring raga and tala in new and innovative ways. The rise of the internet has also played a role in the preservation of indigenous music. With platforms like YouTube and Spotify, these sounds can be shared with a global audience, ensuring that they are not forgotten. A new dawn for the forgotten sounds in the Hall of Legacy where these forgotten sounds reside. There is hope for revival. The increasing interest in cultural preservation, along with the rise of grassroots movements to reclaim indigenous art forms, has sparked a renewed appreciation for these ancient genres. With the help of technology, indigenous music can be documented, shared, and celebrated in ways that were once impossible. Digital platforms are giving artists the opportunity to create new music while staying connected to their cultural roots. As more people recognise the value of these sounds, how they connect us to our ancestors, our land, and our deepest emotions, a new era of appreciation is being born. Forgotten sounds await rediscovery. In the Hall of Legacy, old rhythms echo with new life. Scan the QR on screen to join the community. Also like, subscribe, and join the journey.